so lonely, broken angel. I'm so lonely.
Lord Neuberger, welcome to Hardtalk.
Thank you.
You are now retired from the Supreme Court. I dare say that makes it easier for you to speak in public. Do you think it is a problem that judges in the UK are seen as quite distant from the public they serve?
I think as in so many things, a balance. You have to be, to an extent, remote, because judges are meant to be impartial, both in court and out of court. On the other hand, people expect judges to be able to be in touch, to understand life, because they have to decide cases, decide who's telling the truth, decide what's the most likely thing to have happened in cases involving disputes of fact, and they have to develop the law in a way which is consistent with the way society is going.
In the course of your long career, which took you from one of the UK's top private schools to Oxbridge and then very quickly into the law and very senior positions in the law, do you, in all honesty, now you look back, think that you acquired the knowledge and experience of the country to make you a very successful, effective arbiter of these hugely important matters?
Nobody can claim to be perfect, and I would be the last person to claim that I'm perfect. And yes, you're right. We are all coloured by our background, influenced by our background, and more confident about the world we know. But I think the first stage for any judge or anybody doing work which involves understanding society generally is to be aware of your limitations and to do your best through meeting people, through visiting institutions like schools and universities and places of work, to get to understand other parts of society that maybe you haven't had first-hand experience of.
Yeah, you can reach out to them, but you can also allow them a much greater insight into what you do. And it has to be said, I talk about the tradition of the British justice system and its reputation reaching around the world, but it is quite a secretive and closed institutional framework. Is that something that needs to be addressed?
It is something which needs to be addressed, and it's something which is being addressed. You're entirely right. If you go back 50 years, the judges were like a sort of priesthood, almost shuttered away from society, consciously shuttered away from society. Now, thanks possibly to the change of attitude, the reduction of the respect to gender, the increase in means of communication, judges see themselves as expected to speak out and explain to people what they do and why they do it.
As a very influential voice within the criminal justice system, what is your message today on one very topical issue facing a different branch of the criminal justice system, that is the parole board in the UK? It's under huge fire because of a particular case involving a man called John Warboys, who was convicted of terrible sexual violence, including rapes, which brought him a sentence, an indeterminate sentence, which was to be a minimum of 8 years. Now, it turns out the parole board, after deliberation, decided that he should be eligible for parole after not much more than 8 years. The press is furious, MPs say it's unacceptable, but the parole board will not open up the deliberations that led to that decision. Is that, in this day and age, the wrong attitude?
What has happened in the Warboys case has happened in accordance with the laws laid down by Parliament, and the parole board has acted in accordance with its duties. That certainly is true as far as I know. Whether the law should be changed to make what the parole board does more accessible to the public is a matter which obviously should be considered. But for me to express a clear view about it on the basis of one case would be just the sort of knee-jerk reaction which is very dangerous.
No, but I'm trying to tease out with you a principle here. You seem to be saying, when it came to your own court, last court, the Supreme Court, that you did believe that public trust had to be built on greater transparency. Is that a principle that should now be applied to the parole board too?
I think it should certainly be considered. I can't pretend to be an expert on the parole board. I'm not hedging, but obviously there is an argument, and to my mind, anything concerned with the justice system, and it would include the parole board, one would start with the proposition that it should be as open as possible. In the case of the parole board, there may be reasons, and I'm not competent or expert enough to say, for having a relatively closed system.
What about open and transparent appointments? How did you get tapped up to be the president of the Supreme Court? You know, who ultimately is making these decisions? We know in the United States it's very straightforward. You know, the president nominates, the Congress looks into the nomination and decides whether to accept or reject. It's not clear in this country at all.
Well, I don't entirely agree. It's not as open as the United States, but the way, for instance, a member of the Supreme Court or the president of the Supreme Court is chosen is laid down in statute, the Constitutional Reform Act 2005, and a panel is set up by the Lord Chancellor.
But the public gets no sight of this whatsoever. I mean, the point about the congressional hearings for nominees to the Supreme Court in the United States is the public is invited in. There's an intense focus on not just the judicial record, but frankly, the quality of the character involved. And none of that can happen in the UK.
It can't. But what other jobs senior civil servants aren't chosen in the public sphere? I can see that there could be an argument for more public involvement in the selection or more publicity. But when you look at the circus, which often occurs in relation to selection of American judges, I would not want that to happen here.
It's more honest, though, isn't it? Because all judges, I mean, you aren't a blank slate. You bring your own value system, your own culture, your own experience to the job. I dare say your own politics, too. And in a way, the American system, which makes it quite plain what political perspective the candidate brings to their Supreme Court nomination, that's more honest, it's more open.
Well, I think there's a difference between honesty and openness. I don't think it's particularly honest. I think that when politicians get involved in selection of judges, they don't necessarily choose according to their judicial and legal abilities. They choose according to their political convictions and how much they can trust them to vote in favour of, in legal cases that are politically sensitive. In this country, of course, many judges will have political views, but actually, although we'd be superhuman if they were totally irrelevant, we actually are very, very little influenced by our sort of party political views.
I'm so lonely, broken angel. I'm so lonely.